exhibition object data exchange mechanism is a tongue twister, so we call it EODEM. This project is organized by CIDOC's Documentation Standards Working Group. And it officially got started 2016, 2018, but it has a long history. And I'm glad a lot of the people who have been part of it are here today. So I will tell you what we are aiming at with EODEM and why, how it all got started, who have been involved, and then Rupert will pick up from here. So you don't have to listen to me the whole evening. Richard, are you laughing?
As if.
I can hear you. Turn off your mic. Anyway, so this is what we are trying to do. It's a very simple aim to make it possible to export object exhibition data from a lender's collection management system at the touch of the button and import that data into a borrower's system, which is produced by a different software vendor, most likely, just as easily. But it has still taken a lot of time, no matter how simple we are trying to do it. And what is our motivation? Well, the first one is time. A huge amount of time is spent copying and pasting, or even worse, retyping the object information between collection management systems and forums, or between emails. This beautiful graph is an estimate Rupert managed to extract from his colleagues in the National Gallery London. I was not as successful with my colleagues in Finland. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Anyway, National Gallery London, their best estimate is that they handle, in average, 400 object loan records every year, typing the information into their collection management system. They use the museum system. It's totally unknown in Finland, but probably many of you are familiar with it. When you assume about 15 minutes per entry, this equates to between 16 and 22 days a year entering data into the management, collections management system. This totals over the 10 years of between 165 to 224 days. Potentially an entire working year. So about 10% of the people's time is just typing and copying and pasting and retyping. And you have to note that this estimate ignores the work done providing information for loans out. This might sound like a lot of time, and National Gallery London for sure has an ambitious exhibition program, but it's not an atypical of large museums. And then there is a big demand for interoperability. CIDOC Encyclopedia of Museum Practice, for example, lists 76 different collection management systems. And this is our list is relatively Eurocentric. So if you want to contribute, you can just put in the chat of whichever collection management system you use, and we can pick if there are some unknown systems to us and contact you and ask more about them. Then a Collections Trust, for example, lists 18 Spectrum partners on its website. And each of these systems has its own data structure. They don't speak to each other. So a smooth transfer of object data from one database to another has interested museum people from the early 1990s on. That is when the Consortium for Computer Interchange of Museum Information, CIMI, was founded. And how far have we got? So I listed here some positive developments from the past 10 years where interoperability has been used in a positive way. A Europeana, most of you probably have heard of, even if you weren't from Europe, a European project on collections mobility. I wanted to bring a Finnish example, which is a little bit like a national Europeana. Art UK and collections trust projects. And then there is a new one just coming up, hopefully next year. All these projects focus on exporting data for presentation, but it don't make collection management systems to talk to each other, what we would like to happen. So how this all got started? I first met Norbert Kanter in Sibiu, Romania, 2011. Then I listened to his feedback in 2012 in Helsinki. At that time, the software vendors had the role of sponsors and exhibitors. They were not truly the part of the CIDOC family. When I started co-chairing this working group in 2016, digitization had taken leaps and time seemed to ripe for more close cooperation. In Milan, 2016, conversations went on between Rupert Shepherd, Jonathan Whitson-Cloud, and Norbert Kanter. And then we already started planning the next year's meeting. 2017, we met in Tbilisi, Georgia. And there we started thinking about what data museums would need to exchange. We wanted to ask from museum curators, registrars, and documentation specialists this question. To make the workshop easier to run in 2 short hours, we limited the task to data concerning exhibitions. Thus, we talk about object exhibition data. And here we see some museum people working, and I'm there in the middle in my red pants typing something. Well, we challenged the specialists to create lists of the necessary units of information. It means title or ID number and whatnot you need when you enter exhibition object data. And we got a very, very, very long list, which we summarized during the winter. And then the following year, we met in beautiful Crete, in Heraklion. For that conference, we called for help and invited museum software developers and vendors to talk with us. We noticed that we needed more hands than Rupert, mine, and Jonathan's to deal with all the information. We had 2 days of discussions of the viability of the data exchange mechanism. Would this ever be possible? There were 14 companies represented from all around the world and about 22 participants on both days. So what we extracted it into was a simple use case. We turned a known frustration into a doable and simple form, the implementation of which can benefit both museums and vendors. That's what we are hoping for. And the first results we also got in Heraklion. First, we reviewed the list of units of information which Rupert had summarized after Tbilisi workshop. Then we reached consensus that the project actually was doable. And 3, by the end of the meeting, we had the first draft of the EODEM data profile, which you see here in this slide. The next year, we had initial plan to have a demonstration ready for the ICOM triennial in Kyoto in 2019, but we were really too busy with other comments. So no time to push it forward, but we didn't forget our aim, fortunately. We picked up in early 2020. A small working group evolved, meeting regularly online about once a month. Again, we reached out, and this time to LIDO working group. You see, wait a second. Good heavens, I forgot LIDO working group chair's name, starting with E, who is right there. I'm so
Regina.
sorry. Pardon?
Regina.
Regina. Yes, because I was staring at her and thinking about Erin Coburn and thought, that's not Erin Coburn, it's somebody else. But anyway, 2 more slides, and then Rupert, are you ready? We had representatives from several software vendors and the documentation standards working group participating online, as well as Regina Stein from LIDO working group. The other developers could follow the development via our emailing list, and they received also notes from the meetings. So soon I'm going to pass the mic to Rupert, but I will just tell you that on this one, this year we have been focusing on the final data profile, which comprises a final list of units of information, an agreed data standard with which to encode them, and an agreed file format in which to transfer the data. But now, if I stop sharing, Rupert, are you ready to go with yours? You have your microphone muted. I got to say it.
Yay. But first of all, though, does anyone have any questions about Maya's talk so far? Either unmute yourself and speak, or drop something in the chat. Otherwise, it's just more slides from me, I'm afraid.
Well, there are not so many. I saw all of them. Pure business.
Okay. Well, just give me a moment to get through the intricacies of getting this up and running.
Oh yeah, guys. Rupert had to talk me through the slide share thing so that I could really show you the real presentation and not only my notes for probably 10 or 15 times, and it was quite embarrassing, but he did it. So if you ever have to run a workshop, I can recommend this guy. He doesn't lose his nerve.
Okay, ready when you are.
You are ready to go.
Okay, good, great. Except of course the clicker stops working, right? Okay, so just a reminder of what we're trying to do, which is to make it possible to export object exhibition data from a lender's collections management system at the touch of a button, and to import that data into a borrower's system, one that's produced probably by a different software vendor, just as easily. So this is basically how it should work. We start with an object that is recorded in a database. The lender opens their collections management system and finds the record. They then press the EODEM export button, and an EODEM file or group of files is created. We're going to keep the actual transport mechanism very simple. They email the file to the borrower. The borrower will receive the email and save the file. They'll open their CMS, they'll press the EODEM import button, and the data should be stored in their database. So it should be that straightforward. Well, in order to transfer the data, it has to be in a standardized form. And so we needed to find a standard to use. It had to be something that was well established, and it had to be something that had already been incorporated into at least some collections management systems in some form. So we chose, in the end, a CIDOC standard for lightweight information describing objects, otherwise known as LIDO, which had recently been built into several collections management systems as part of the Europeana Inside project. And by choosing LIDO, it also made the decision as to the file format to use. LIDO uses the long-established and highly flexible extensible markup language, or XML. But LIDO, which is primarily designed to deliver data for aggregated online collections, did not contain all the units of information we required. It lacked collection management information, particularly. It just wasn't set up to manage that kind of data. And indeed, some of our requirements did not actually fit the LIDO standard. Luckily, LIDO was in the process of being revised. A draft version 1.1 was issued for comment in April this year. And we're very grateful to Regina Stein, the chair of the LIDO working group, for collaborating with us to find solutions to some of the problems we had when we tried to implement EODEM in LIDO. I'm going to talk a bit more, both Regina and I, about that cooperation in a joint working group workshop at 1400 hours CE time, Central European time tomorrow, which is a joint workshop between the EODEM group and the LIDO working group. But now I just want to point out what some of those problems were. First of all, as currently defined, measurements in LIDO are measurements of the actual object. I say as currently defined, as defined in version 1.0. Measurements in LIDO are measurements of the actual object, length, weight, height, and so on. But what we wanted to record were measurements that relate to the object's requirements, things like the range of temperature, relative humidity, etc., within which it should be stored and displayed. A second problem was that events described in LIDO must be specific historical occurrences. But we wanted to tie these requirements to generic events, such as any display or any transport of the object. And finally, we needed somewhere in the LIDO structure to identify a group of sets of measurements which are all about one thing. For example, an object's temperature requirements, and to distinguish that set of measurements from, for example, an object's light exposure requirements. Now, I'm not going to get into the technical details. These are all, I'd end up showing you big slugs of XML, which we're not ready for yet. It's still early in the conference. But together, the LIDO working group and the EODEM team have found ways to address all these problems. We've tried to address some other problems as we draw up the standard. The first of these is the variable level of documentation in many museums. The current EODEM data profile contains 35 units of information, and I'd be very surprised if any museum could actually provide data for all of these. But we're working on the principle that anything is better than nothing, and so the only mandatory units of information for an EODEM record are these 9. But if we leave out the data that is either identical for every record, or is underlying system information that would be added on export, then we're left with just 4 units of information, which we need a source system to record. Object type, an object's title or name, an object identifier, its accession number or inventory number, and something that's mandated by LIDO, its record type, which is basically whether the record relates to a single item or a group of objects. And that's it. The second issue is what I'll call data granularity. If we consider, for example, a set of dimensions, say for a painting, so nice and easy, it just has height and width, 176.5 by 191 centimeters. Now, this can be expressed just as a string of characters, as you can see on the slide, or it can be broken down into individual fields. So type is height, values 176.5, unit equals centimeter, and then the same repeated for the width. Well, what happens if your collections management system doesn't have those granular fields? EODEM isn't in the business of forcing the addition of new fields on collections management systems, so it will also accept an unstructured string alongside structured data. Now, dimensions are usually broken down into individual fields, but entering data like this is time consuming, or perhaps users have only been able to cut and paste a string from an older system. EODEM will still accept that suboptimal data. Similar things apply to names, for example, and particularly to things like temperature requirements. So, as I've said, many EODEM units of information include both a free text field and a set of structured fields. And the aim is, or our intention is, that the source system will deliver whatever it can. And the developers of the receiving system will then decide whether they want to try to parse unstructured strings into separate fields, or just take them as is, as a single string. Or indeed, they may want to take structured data when it's offered, and for various reasons just concatenate that into strings and not try and work out how to store it as structured data. Basically, everything depends on the vendor's own systems and how much work they want to put into to developing them to work with EODEM. So where are we? We've now finalized a draft LIDO profile for EODEM and created a couple of sample records. At the conference we're participating in now, we're running 3 workshops. First of all, this one, which is aimed at introducing the project to potential users, collections managers and so on in museums, documentalists and exhibition staff. Tomorrow, as I said, we have a joint workshop with the LIDO working group to talk about the benefits of collaboration when drawing up standards. And then on Wednesday, we have a closed workshop for system developers to discuss the steps required to develop the actual export-import mechanisms in individual collections management systems, and to look at some of the potential problems or questions that might arise during the development process. If you are a developer and want to join in that workshop and haven't had an invitation yet, do please drop me a line and let me know. Now, after this week, the LIDO data structure relies upon descriptive terms to indicate what information particular areas of the data hold, and these rely upon controlled vocabularies, and we need to agree which particular terms we will use for our EODEM record. LIDO has its own vocabulary, LIDO terminology, and the LIDO working group has already added several draft terms for us as candidate terms, particularly for types of events. But we also need to add some more general terms, particularly relating to object environmental requirements. And so we're currently drawing up candidate terms to submit to the Getty's AAT. We also want the system to be incorporated into as many collections management systems as possible, and we hope that system vendors will spend the next year doing just this. So our ambition is that, all being well, we would be able to give a live demonstration of the transfer of EODEM records between multiple collections management systems at the September 21 conferences, I assume that's when they'll be, of both CIDOC and Collections Trust. And that's it from me, so I shall unshare my screen.